I decided to start a book reading of this book I came across called Mental Traps, The Overthinker's Guide to a Happier Life by Andrea Kukla. This is an interesting book. It just came across my kind of, how do I describe it? Just, one of these things that comes in your hand. Anyways, I'm going to start with reading chapter number 2 called Persistence, because I think there's a lot of interesting things that need to be understood here. So, persistence. The first trap, persistence, is to continue to work on projects that have lost their value. The activity had meaning for us once, or we would never have begun. The meaning has evaporated before we could reach the end. Yet we go on, either because we don't notice the change or out of sheer inertia. We start a Monopoly game with great enthusiasm, and inevitably we get bored before we reach the end. But instead of quitting, we toil without pleasure, quote, just to get it over with, close quote. There can be no clearer example of a waste of time. Someone asked us to recall the name of a supporting actor in a B movie of the 40s. It's on the tip of our tongue, but we can't quite come up with it. Meanwhile, the person who wanted to know has departed from the scene. But her problem hasn't departed with her. It bedevils us all day. Originally, our aim was to answer someone's question, but this aim isn't what keeps us going now. Even the other's death wouldn't relieve us of our burden. We start to watch a television show and soon realize it's hopelessly dull. Yet we watch it, quote, to the bitter end, close quote, complaining all the while about how awful it is. We foolishly begin to sing, quote, 100 bottles of beer on the wall, close quote. When we pass the 85th bottle of mark, we're already sick of the enterprise. But we don't quit. Instead, we sing faster so that we may sooner come to the end of it. In a political discussion, we conceive of a decisive but lengthy refutation of our opponent's view. Halfway through our exposition, he announces that he's been convinced. We need say no more, yet we tediously bring the argument to a superfluous conclusion. We aren't sufficiently impressed by the sheer peculiarity of actions like these. What makes these activities mental trap is that they proceed without reference to our needs or interests. It doesn't ordinarily give us pleasure to carry on with them to the bitter end. On the contrary, the too long Monopoly game, the struggle to remember trivial information, the awful television shows are experienced as irritants. Yet we're impatient to be done with them and relieved when they finally do come to an end. If there's a pill that could make us forget we were ever asked about the B-movie actor, we would gladly swallow it. Those who espouse the hedonistic view that we always act to maximize our pleasure would be hard put to explain phenomena like these. Of course, we may persevere for values other than pleasure. We may finish a tedious Monopoly game in order to not disappoint a child. We may watch an awful show to the end because it's our job to write a review. We may sing our way down to the last bottle of beer as an exercise in patience. Joyless perseverance is not always a trap of persistence. But most watchers of awful television shows are not critics, and most singers of 100 bottles of beer on the wall are not engaged in spiritual exercises. They're accomplishing nothing and not enjoying it. Incredibly, our culture teaches us to regard persistence as a virtue. We boast that once we are set on a certain course, nothing can dissuade us from following it to the end. We teach our children that it's a sign of weakness, even immorality, to leave anything half done. It's undeniable that our affairs benefit greatly from the capacity to persevere in the face of adversity, but it's quite another thing to suggest that this capacity should always and indiscriminately be exercised. A useful distinction may be drawn between persistence and perseverance. We persevere when we steadfastly pursue our aims despite the obstacles that are encountered along the way, but we merely persist if we doggedly carry on the directions that are known to lead to a dead end. The moral imperative to finish everything we start is deeply ingrained. We find it difficult to abandon even the most transparent, vapid enterprises in midstream. The mere act of beginning already binds us to continuing to the end, whether or not the original reasons for it actively remain valid. We act as though we were bound to a promise made to no one but ourselves. We begin to watch a television show solely for the sake of amusement, but a second motive enters the picture almost immediately, the need to complete what we began. So long as we remain amused, this need can scarcely be felt. It's a push in the direction of we are already traveling. But its effect is noticed as soon as we lose interest in the show. Were amusement the only motive for watching, we would quit immediately. But the second motive, to finish what we began just because it was begun, makes us persist. Newton's laws stipulate that a moving body will continue to move in the same direction until its inertia is overcome by other forces. It seems that we also obey a law of mental inertia. Having begun an activity, we are kept moving in the same psychological direction until we reach the end. As in the case of physical inertia, this impulse may be overcome by other tendencies. Not every Monopoly game is played out to the end. An earthquake, a sudden flood, or a full bladder will put a stop to all that, but the most stubborn case of persistence. Even ordinary boredom may be strong enough to make us quit, and we must be more than a little bored. The emergency must be more than a little pressing, our bladder more than a little full. Inertia systematically tips the scales in favor of continuing with the task at hand regardless of the merits of the case. The result is that our decision to quit often comes a little too late. It takes but a moment's resolve to launch ourselves upon the vastest enterprises. Once we're launched, however, we can't simply cancel our plans with another momentary act of will. We've lost the off button. We've sometimes tried to justify persistence by saying that we don't wish our investment of time and energy to come to naught. If we quit the game now, our previous efforts to win will have been in vain. The line of thinking explains why an ongoing state of persistence becomes progressively more difficult to terminate. If we've completed only a few moves in a board game, our investment is so small that we might write it off with little regret. But after several hours of grim and pleasureless play, it seems a shame not to go a little longer and finish it up. So much effort will have gone to waste. Of course, this is a spurious argument. The pleasureless hours have already gone to waste. They won't be redeemed by finishing it up. It's time to cut our losses and run. Paradoxically, our instinct for conservation leads us only to more waste. The absurd reluctance to let go of worthless things may even cause us to embark on activities that have no value right from the start. We may buy objects that are of no use to us because we can't waste the opportunity for sale, or eat when we aren't hungry so that the food won't have to be thrown out, or cart home junk from other people's attics. This trap is a first cousin to persistence. Here, we're not caught in the midstream by the disappearance of the previous value. What we do has no value from the moment we begin. For the sake of formal elegance, we may consider it to be a limiting case of the same trap. In this type of instantaneous persistence, it's advisable to quit as soon as we start. Boring games, awful shows, and sales items we can't use possess the happy property of coming to an end by themselves. Not all activities are self-terminating, however. A job, a marriage, a habit is potentially forever. When an enterprise or indefinite duration loses its value, we may be plunged into a state of perpetual persistence. The mere passage of time will not deliver us from this trap. We're on a Monopoly game that never ends. We may perpetually persist at relationships that have turned irretrievably sour, jobs that hold no present satisfaction for us and no hope to the future, old hobbies that no longer bring us pleasure, daily routines that only burden and restrict our lives. Often we stay on fruitless course simply because we don't think to reevaluate our goals. We've lived like this for so long with this person, this job, this house, and this neighborhood, wearing this style of dress, enacting these dietary hygiene rituals in this particular order, that it no longer occurs to us that things could be otherwise. Our drab and hateful existence is taken to be an absolute condition imposed on us by fate, like the shape of your head, like the shape of our head. We may not like it, but there it is. If we stop to ask ourselves whether we wish to continue along our present course, the answer might be crystal clear. Any amount of insecurity would be preferable to doing this for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year until we die. But we don't always ask ourselves. We complain, but we take the necessity of the status quo for granted. Hence, we persist in the very patterns of behavior that sustain it. Since the option of quitting doesn't present itself, the only alternative is to get it over with. Like a tedious Monopoly game. Unfortunately, this tedious game constitutes our whole life. Our unwillingness to abandon a bad situation may also stem from a belief that the alternatives are even worse. Perhaps we'll starve if we quit our job. Our view of the matter may or may not be correct. In either case, the reason for staying is not a mental trap. It's the best choice we can make given our understanding of the situation. But we must watch out that we don't use this type of argument to rationalize the sheer force of inertia. Sometimes we simply can't change, although every indication cries out that we should. We feel compelled to stay on the same course just as we've driven to finish the Monopoly game. So long as we remain conscious of our dilemma there's some hope that we will break out of the deadlock. Once we've neatly rationalized our situation as the best choice of a poor lot, however, it's all over for us. It's particularly easy to fall into a perpetual case of negative persistence. Here we persist in not doing something that would be rewarding. We never open ourselves up to intimate relationships because we did once before with disastrous results. We never eat olives because we once, 20 years ago, tried one and had to spit it out. We never tackle mathematical problems because we were terrible in math at school. Not doing something is also a project without an end. We are never finishing avoiding olives. These habits of omission are therefore liable to persistent perpetuity. In fact, they are especially liable to persist. It's relatively easy to see when we should quit doing something, such as eating some tasteless cereal every morning experience. But however, we will discover that it's time to quit. But how will we discover that it's time to quit not doing something, such as avoiding olives? Perhaps we should enjoy them now if only we tried them. But so long as we negatively persist, there's nothing in our experience that tells us so. Negative persistence is the mental structure underlying many phobias. Having once had a bad experience in a large crowd, or driving along a mountain road, or speaking before an audience, we avoid the object of our distress forever. The initial experience may have been due to a unique confluence of factors. Other crowds, other roads, other audiences, or even the same ones another day may have had a different effect on all of us. But because we avoid them all, we're not in a position to find out. Of course, this problem is further compounded by the fact that our expectations of panic tends to act in self-fulfilling prophecy, but that's another trap. If we refrain from the activity, how can we ever know that it has value, its value has changed? The only answer is not to give up on anything for all time to come. It's a good idea to cast an occasional glance at what we have excluded from our life because it's too distasteful, painful, difficult. Unbeknownst to us, our tastes, our courage, our abilities, our luck, or the world itself may have changed. An annual nibble at an olive or an intimate relationship may pay off handsomely in the end. When it comes to legal matters, persistence is one of those weird things because you will start a task, and it's, for someone who's well disciplined, it's really important to finish the task, to complete the task. Otherwise, you would have wasted all your time without actually getting something completed. And this is one of those weird things that is hard to deal with mentally, because if you've spent 30 hours researching a topic to prepare paperwork to be filed in court, and then the legal matter shifts to that's no longer relevant, it's difficult to let it go. It's difficult to just pivot out of it and just put that in the filing cabinet for later. Sometimes you'll keep going with that thought because you won't let it go. And the problem is everyone else has moved on. So even though you might have 30 hours worth of research on a specific nuanced topic that was really important to win your legal argument, now the legal landscape has changed. Either the notice of action has been amended to no longer talk about that subject, or the petition you were trying to respond to has been withdrawn, or an application that you were responding to or preparing for is no longer relevant. Say one of the litigants dies, and now their whole part of the scheme is no longer relevant because you can't sue a dead person. Maybe you can go after their estate, but it gets complicated. So what's weird is we have this momentum going on with this perseverance that can be good and it can be bad. And we have to be careful about it. I mean, you can always reuse your research in a different legal matter. The problem is that if you're actually pursuing only one legal matter ever, it seems like it's a real big waste to you. But you have to remember there may be other legal matters coming forward, and you can do other things with your research. You can actually write essays on it, publish it online. You can do all kinds of really interesting things with it, but you have to let go. This is the thing that's difficult, is difficult to just let go, to change tact, change direction. And I've had this experience where I spent, 30, 40 hours on a topic, and then the legal landscape shifted beneath my feet. Either the notice of action was amended to just completely remove parties that I had this great kind of argument against, but it's no longer relevant because they're no longer parties. Or I was responding to a application to defend it vigorously, and I had the winning argument, and the other side withdrew it from the scheduling and never put it back on the schedule. So I've had these experiences where I'm ready for the fight. The problem is the other side knew it and just withdrew without actually having the fight because they knew they were going to lose. The problem is that if you spend 30, 40, 50 hours getting ready for a legal battle, and then they pull that matter off the docket and never refile it again, what do? Right? You have to just pivot and move on. This is where persistence can be a problem. You have to just let it go. Take your research, just file it differently. Remember where it is because it can be useful later on in the future. But do not keep going with it, because I've seen people who cannot let go of a subject in court talk about a matter that's no longer relevant legally and really upset the judge, because the judge is saying, why are you talking about this? We've already moved past that. It's no longer an issue, where that's no longer to be talked about. And they just keep going and going and going. And it wastes the court's time, it wastes all the litigants' time, it wastes everyone's time, and you end up blowing the thing up in your face. Why? Because you put so much time and effort into study and preparing for a battle that was over before it started. You had a winning hand and you just can't let it go. But the problem is, if you can't let it go, you will lose. And that's one of the strategies that happens in the court system. Someone will file an application, and then you'll file a response to that application, and they'll put it down for a hearing and then find some excuse to actually withdraw it from the hearing schedule because, someone got sick or there's a funeral, whatever excuse they have, it gets withdrawn from the book and never put down for an actual hearing. I've seen this happen again and again. And the problem is, if you are one of these persistent people who just keeps going through to the end, you can be misled by the other side who will just do a feign. A feign is when you fake something is going to happen. So they say, we're going to file an application for vacant possession of your house where you live. And then you, in response to that, waiting for that to happen, start doing all this research, preparing for what they claimed they were going to do against you. And guess what? They never do it. Well, you spent 20, 30 hours preparing for a fight that was never actually filed. What doing with those 30 hours? You're doing something that was not actually on task because they filed a different motion, a different application, or a different petition, and that you did not spend the time preparing for because you were spending time preparing for a feign that did not happen. So you have to be careful about this persistence thing, this perseverance thing. You have to know when it's important to finish a topic, finish a subject, finish a task. And there's other times we have to abandon it. As soon as you know that there's not going to be any benefit to completing it, you have to let it go. If you don't let it go, you only have yourself to blame, because you're just going to waste the time and energy. All that time and energy is just going to be gone and you'll never get it back. So you have to appreciate that when you do spend time and energy researching a topic, you will know it from that point forward. It might have to be refreshed from time to time, but you are learning something that is a skill set, that is a knowledge template that can be used in multiple places and multiple times in the future. So it's okay to abandon stuff when it's no longer useful or it's lost its purpose. You have to appreciate when this perseverance idea becomes a liability rather than a benefit. You have to know when to abandon something because it's lost its purpose. And if you don't, you can be misled purposely by the other side. If you find yourself against a strategic litigant who's a lawyer who's able to bob and weave, fake file stuff or really file stuff and then withdraw it, find plausible excuse to withdraw it from the books and never put it back on. You have to be careful because there's dirty tricks happening all the time and you've got to not fall for it. You have to put the time and energy, 110%, when you know you have something coming up. But if something has changed and you're no longer able to continue on with the thing, then you have to let it go because there's only so many hours in a day. And if you're not putting the hours in every day on the subject matter that matters, that actually is coming up, that is relevant to succeed in your task, then you've missed the plot. You've lost the plot. You've been misled. But this comes down to you making personal choices. This is what's important for people to understand. You are in charge of you. You're not in charge of the outside world, but you are in charge of you and the decisions you make and the time you commit to doing specific projects, research tasks, drafting of documents. There's a point where if you're drafting a document and the document's no longer going to be useful or no longer going to be used, you stop. You don't keep drafting the document and put another 5-10 hours into a document that's not going to be filed. Why? Because it's not going to be filed. So you can spend that 10 hours doing something else on a document that will be filed rather than the unfiled documents. This is where it's important that you just let go. Let go of those tasks that are no longer useful. And it takes wisdom, it takes experience, it takes discipline to be able to know when to hold them, when to fold them, and when to run, when to cut and run, because there's times you have to just let it go. Otherwise, you will be self-sabotaging because of your persistence in the wrong tasks. Every litigant suffers from this, and it's difficult to know when enough is enough and when you have to just stop it. Just stop that and don't come back to it until you have a good reason to. And it's difficult because there's no clear path in litigation. There's lots of false positives and no clear path. You have to figure it out on your own. You have to make decisions based on the information you have that may be limited. Whether the decision is good or bad, you never know how it's going to turn out. Because sometimes a bad decision turns out to be good. Other times a good decision turns out to be bad. You have to know when to stop in the middle of the process if you have to, if it's a smart move. And it takes a disciplined litigant to do that, to bob and weave, pivot, and change direction to go to what actually matters. And you learn over time. And the faster you learn, the sooner you're going to get to the point where you're going to be able to put your time and energy into things that actually matter and not keep going down the road of tasks that are not going to be fruitful for you or have benefit. So that's important to consider in litigation matters, especially for a pro se self-represented litigant, because like I said, there's no path forward. Every litigation is different. Every process is different. There's so many factors to measure out. Competing interests, competing factors, competing strategies. And there's no perfect strategy because it's changing all the time. What might be a great strategy today might change 3 weeks from now because the game has changed. The litigants might have changed. Someone might have died, or they replaced one lawyer with another lawyer who has a completely different worldview, a completely different strategy, a completely different method of operation. And you never know what you're going to deal with until you're there. So you have to do the best you can, make whatever decisions you can based on your best information you have at the time, follow it through to the point where it makes sense, and then abandon it if you need to move on to something that makes more sense. You have to let go, know when to let go. It's very difficult for someone who's chasing a goal and with no clear signal to stop.